Hello all, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at the ways that Hollywood, actors, and acting have all worked to sabotage American culture. That actors have become so highly valued and attained godlike status among the American population is indicative of extremely deep and pervasive cultural problems. The US is by no means the first nation to see these problems play out, and for a little context, it helps to take a look at ancient Greece. Theater was a major part of Greek culture, but as opposed to its modern form, their plays were more motivated by education than entertainment, using stories of the gods and their interactions with humans to sustain and unite Greek culture. The Greeks also started the genre of tragedy that studied and made a spectacle of humanity's innate vulnerabilities, demonstrating that even the best intentions can lead to absolute horror. The Greek plays went on to be a basis for some of the most cherished tales across time, and over 2.5 millennia later still have a big impact on modern movies. According to the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, often ranked among the greatest philosophers of all time, that Greek love of theater started to become a problem after the appearance of Socrates, also ranked among the greatest philosophers of all time, where the teachings of Socrates played such a large role in dramatically transforming Greek culture from a people who mainly valued the capacity to reason for outwitting and deceiving opponents to one that valued it for human harmony and progress. Nietzsche held Socrates responsible for having made all of Greece's men into actors, where theater and theatrics had fully suffused with daily life. Much of that acting manifested in ancient Greece's widespread cultural phenomenon of sophistry, a school of knowledge intended to teach students eloquent and persuasive speech, but over time accumulating immense disdain, as most who took up its practice used their advanced reasoning to mislead others and empower themselves. As mentioned in a previous video, sophists are intelligent men who are convinced that their audience is hopelessly stupid. And their methods are still popular with figures like Steve Bannon, Vivek Ramaswamy, J.D. Vance, or even Hillary Clinton. Though they use those methods to make it appear as though they have moral convictions, sophists are inherently void of morals because their singular life purpose is to cultivate their own power. Nietzsche claimed that as Greece became a nation of sophists and actors, its people came to prefer men who are all outward show, pompous speech, declamatory gestures, and address themselves to shallow souls who care only for appearance, sound, and effect, adding that Greece's population would rather be persuaded than instructed. And though the people of ancient Greece were once enormously prosperous, as far as Nietzsche was concerned, that cultural transition supposedly initiated by Socrates was responsible for their fall to the Romans, warning it probably also spells their doom. And though the Romans made space for theater in their social world and revered certain aspects of Greek culture, serving as a basis for much of their own, Roman plays have had far less impact on the modern world, and their actors were widely scorned. Though the Romans certainly had their own actors and sophists, they saw much of Greek culture and its focus on intellectual development as responsible for producing soft, unseemly men, many Romans seeing that cultural transition as also partly responsible for Greece's downfall. Roman actors who dallied in the profession for too long could expect punishment from their overlord Roman censors, the office of censor being a quite prestigious elected position in the Roman political world that had the duty of regulating not just the moral path taken by the greater Roman culture, but even the moral actions of individual Romans. Alongside Roman gladiators, prostitutes, and artists, actors were relegated to a social class known as the infamous, or citizens who used their bodies to make money, viewed as a form of slavery, and the Roman legal system allotting the infamous fewer rights than the social classes above them. The Romans didn't put much effort into acting in theater because rigidly hierarchical nations aren't known for invention and innovation. Take modern Russia, for instance, that contributes little to the global aesthetic world, and aside from weaponry has become technologically stagnant. Or China, that's had to steal much of their technology and has only been able to brute force innovation by building what's known as an engineering state, channeling much of their resources toward manufacturing more engineers. Like the Roman Empire, that's not to say that strictly hierarchical societies can't be quite persistent and profitable, just like cults can be quite successful. But like cults, their chief goal is mentally and physically dominating the people under their rule, and it comes at the cost of freedom that's such a strong catalyst for invention and innovation. It's no coincidence that as America has become more top-down, the quality of our movie industry has cratered, because autocracies, oligarchies, and monarchies copy far more than they create. When it comes to the US relationship with actors and acting, it seems there's little controversy in saying that the two have fully synthesized with American culture. American citizens themselves have increasingly become actors over the past 2 decades, alongside the colossal expansion of the internet, some calling it a world stage that a disturbing number have dedicated their lives to performing on. Since the mid-aughts, most American youths list fame as their core metric for measuring personal success in life. And not coincidentally, it's arguably the chief value communicated by American media. Like the reality shows that gained titanic popularity around the same time and went to such great lengths in blurring the line between acting and authenticity, the social media that came up alongside them did likewise. More began faking and amplifying emotional reactions in hopes of drawing more attention. More began using social media for trolling or to LARP as CEOs and entrepreneurs. More began staking their sense of personal self-worth on the size of their audience. More began donning costumes for cosplay so they could emulate their favorite media figures. And more began subscribing to fashion trends that legitimized dressing up as certain subcultures, like gangsters and cowboys. More YouTube personalities began building theater sets, surrounding themselves with props and using stock footage reels that exhibit hollow reflections of reality. More advertisements and PR campaigns labored feverishly to convince Americans that the businesses they were supporting weren't responsible for the diverse negative impacts on the nation that they quite obviously were, and more Americans were swallowed by the pervasive sense that everything around them is fake. More celebrities began reigning over dedicated fawning fandoms and were hounded by rabidly obsessive fans, with stans becoming an expected norm in the American milieu. When it comes to those celebrities themselves, they've of course had a substantial impact on the development of American culture. In a more minor example, though long revered for the ability to convincingly simulate emotions on demand, in recent decades American actors have become widely valorized for practicing method acting, where they strive to live the role of their character as completely as possible, even when the cameras aren't rolling, and usually employed by men depicting raging scumbags. Actors have of course had much larger impacts on the American social world too, and in recent decades have increasingly become expected to use their fame to call attention to various causes, their strength of sway corresponding with their heights of stardom. That talent for drawing attention has downsides too, though, and the endless flow of scandals that spill out of the American acting world provides Americans with more entertainment than their movies. Their periodic deaths ignite headlines nationwide and can induce states of national mourning. When it comes to international politics, America's actors and their movies have done a great deal to foster America's soft power, playing a deceivingly large role in anchoring America's superpower status. Inside the US, as actors have become increasingly idolized, they've become an indispensable tool for lending politicians credibility. And just like the merging worlds of business and politics, as America's become more hierarchical and top-down, we've seen an influx of acting dynasties where multiple generations of the same family serve as America's modern take on aristocracy and shape American culture. As the worlds of acting and politics unite, it being no coincidence that modern conservatism and liberalism were born in Southern California, there have been a variety of bizarre consequences for the American milieu. As we've watched that milieu steadily disintegrate and conspiracy theories go mainstream, more have subscribed to delusions of crisis actors, supposedly paid to fake trauma, and federal agents posing as extremists seeking to achieve some nefarious end. We've seen more American citizens who deeply hate actors for expressing their opinions and fighting for certain causes, yet those same citizens monetarily contribute to their industry daily and directly take part in amplifying the cultural conditions that ensure the opinions of actors have so much clout. We've seen outsourced patriotism where actors in foreign nations pretend to be concerned American citizens and accumulate massive followings on social media. We've seen that social media help political talking head actors go stratospheric by being as controversial as possible, manipulating emotions to the greatest extent possible. And when their charades land them in court, we've seen them reveal their true professions as entertainers. We've seen most Americans get their news from actors on social media who distribute kernels of truth coated in mountains of BS that dissolve not just the social fabric, but even the average American's grip on reality. We've seen more people on the left worship figures who act as though they have moral foundations, and more on the right worshiping pretend masculinity from pampered, soft-handed men caked in makeup. We've seen billionaires who pretend to be physicists, engineers, and video game savants. We've seen the rise of trad wives and trad sons who play their roles 24/7. We've seen and suffered the reflexive shock of uncanny valley MAGA face that turns people into Play-Doh, makes them into walking caricatures, and artificially hyper-differentiates between males and females. We've seen the rise of performative masculinity where insecure males pretend that they're not, and more Americans reverting to and advocating for exaggerated performances of gender where males and females are more confined to specific social roles. We've seen men entrusted with the vital duty of enforcing our nation's laws who behind the scenes are enormously corrupt. Though Washington, D.C. was once called Hollywood for ugly people, and particularly in the 19th century, American politicians were far more physically reflective of the wider population. As acting and politics unite, that's less often the case. Successful politicians have increasingly come to rely on their visual appeal, but the synthesis of acting and politics has had some far more insidious effects too. Popularized in the long-time Western adage, stagecraft is statecraft, more are referring to the US as a stage-managed democracy. And one-time Attorney General candidate Matt Gaetz stated it quite plainly with, your representatives are performers. We all are. The question is for whom? As acting and politics unite, we've seen dramatic theatrics at Congress's confirmation hearings and similar performances at congressional hearings on major issues that aren't intended to solve anything. We've seen representatives produce more fake legislation intended to do nothing more than devour attention. We've seen Congress hold scripted votes where a few specific representatives vote against the rest of their party so their constituents won't revolt for legislation that screws them over, but conveniently that legislation still has enough votes to pass. That's allowed to take place because our representatives have become actors themselves, whose morals have no authentic foundation and transform according to whatever scene they're currently playing. Performing what's sometimes known as concern kabuki, we've seen politicians switch their stances on major moral issues, like Hillary and Obama, who announced their opposition to gay marriage while on the campaign trail. But others switch their entire persona, like entertainers Russell Brand or Marjorie Taylor Greene, acting as social chameleons whose values are dictated by whatever group they currently see as having the most potential for advancing their own power. And where Republicans were once thoroughly against acting, endlessly upbraiding Hollywood's vice and moral vacancy, and Republican representatives quite openly screwing over Americans to their face, they've since joined the drama club and become accomplished thespians, having adopted tactics from the Democrats and screwing over Americans behind their back. With America's presidential candidates often drawn from the ranks of Congress, their presidential campaigns have steadily grown more staged and theatrical, reading lines and giving ludicrously dramatized performances at their pre-election presidential debates, or candidates like Harris, who couldn't go on Rogan's show because her memorized script had a 1-hour time limit. America's political drama club sees its climax in the Trump administration, with his administration widely referred to as central casting. Some have called their political theater an elaborate display of smoke and mirrors, examples seen in their highly produced propaganda advertisements / public service announcements, their highly dramatized and publicized fake release of the Epstein files to MAGA flunkies that contained almost no new information, or their acts of performative cruelty that's largely used to distract from bigger problems. An administration filled with ex-media personalities, it's also filled with cosplay performers like Kristi Noem, who seems to have a penchant for playing dress-up and has been called a human photo op. You also have Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who dons a variety of very stylish pantsuits while slathered in hair gel, makeup, and preaching his sham warrior ethos. Next, you have Trump's FBI, where Bongino and Patel have been frequenting the costumes department, with FBI agents claiming that they demanded guns and badges upon their installation to the Bureau, and Patel famously having refused to exit his plane in Utah without the FBI raid jacket, so necessary to convincing viewers that he was playing the part of a really real FBI director. Finally, you have administration ally Vivek Ramaswamy, who seems to take a note from Kristi Noem and trades costumes as dictated by what the scene currently calls for. Sometimes a college kid, sometimes a businessman, and sometimes a cowboy. Alongside Ramaswamy, you also have figures like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, who serve as America's modern sophists, with Vance and Rubio not coincidentally once both being fiercely anti-Trump because they're men desperate to concentrate their own power and are more than willing to violate their own fake morals to do so. Alternatively, you have actors like Attorney General Pam Bondi, who showed up to her congressional oversight hearing with a literal scripted list of planned sick burns for her inquisitors, cranking the administration's theatrics up to full throttle. There's also the gaggingly saccharine displays of praise and genuflection at the televised cabinet meetings, Trump's flunkies attributing him feats bizarrely divorced from reality. Which brings us to America's actor-in-chief, Donald. I know many prefer to overlook his many failed business ventures and think of him chiefly as a businessman, but this is a man who couldn't even turn a profit on casinos and has been far more successful as an actor. Successful businessmen don't spend their time making chump change on reality shows. Donald, of course, is not the first actor to sit in the Oval Office, with Reagan having long served in the profession too, and it's no coincidence that the two presidents most idolized by the Republican Party have been ex-actors. Though he surely would have killed it on reality shows, Reagan's acting career was quarantined to playing less complicated characters, specifically because he himself wasn't a particularly complicated man, having a political reputation as a, quote, man reading a script, and described as a man who parrots things, shallow and affable, or President Richard Nixon, who likewise described the Gipper as shallow. That internal simplicity is shared with Trump and part of what makes them so beloved by their supporters, loved to such an extent that both have been dubbed the Teflon president because they got and get away with things that would see other politicians crucified, demonstrating just how much acting has changed in recent decades. Trump instead brings the far more emotionally charged reality show ambiance to the presidency. Described as a president who sees the world as a TV show, we've seen reality show themes surface in his Supreme Court nominations, cabinet meetings, and summits with foreign leaders. Trump famously saying, "This is going to be great television," while hosting Zelensky, or "I watched it like it was a television show" after the Maduro abduction. Eternally desperate for attention, Trump's stage addiction requires that he hold campaign rallies even while in office, and though he constantly berates the media, he's one of their most diehard junkies, the two sharing a parasitic relationship, and media serving as the producers in Trump's real-world reality show. And though Washington, D.C. may have once been called Hollywood for ugly people, it's now just Hollywood, as Trump famously prefers people who, quote, look the part, and installed a slew of photogenic people to positions they've proven grossly unqualified for. A little strange that an administration that talks so much of meritocracy seems to help people fail up, almost like they're drawn to inconsistencies and contradictions like a moth to flame. Going a step beyond reality shows, many have pointed to the similarities between the Trump administration and pro wrestling, seeing Trump as having perfected the art of kayfabe, pro wrestling's synthesis of dramatic fake violence, and scripting acted scenes designed to manipulate viewers' emotion, an approach to politics often traced back to Newt Gingrich in the 90s. The type of personality that lusts after immense power and sees the world as a stage for acting also commonly cultivates passions for cinema, and perhaps it's no coincidence that across the last century and across cultures, men like Ronald Reagan, Kim Jong-il, Joseph Stalin, Walt Disney, Howard Hughes, and Adolf Hitler have all been movie buffs, also not coincidentally tending to favor Western. It's so common that it seems a little odd to me that Trump isn't more of a movie buff, but I suspect in Trump's version, he's the lead actor and director in the greatest movie of all time, Reality. A particularly revealing example took place on the 2024 campaign trail when Trump pretended to perform physical labor at a McDonald's, even donning an apron and handing out fries, suspiciously reminiscent of the fake village and market kept by Queen Marie Antoinette prior to the French Revolution, where she and friends amused themselves by pretending to perform the menial labors of peasants. The ludicrous irony here is that Americans, so averse to the opinions of actors and the outsized influence they have on American culture, elected one. Those same people hate being duped to such an extent that they're largely incapable of admitting when they have been swindled. Ardent believers in their own intentionally isolated perspective and exceedingly proud victims of the sunk cost fallacy. Should a substantial number of them come to a moment of clarity, they're going to go absolutely ballistic. Zooming out and taking a big picture view of the problem, as cultures become more rigidly hierarchical and top down, the populations who live under them have little choice but to become actors. Maintaining station on the social pyramid scheme, let alone climbing it, requires that most Americans don fake personas and put on detailed, persuasive performances for their coworkers, customers, landlords, and bosses. As the American economy increasingly depends on service jobs over manufacturing, more Americans are forced to become cast members in putting on a convincing act for the people they serve. As station on the social ladder gains ever more supreme social significance, more people impulsively compensate for their inevitable feelings of inadequacy by acting as though they have more money and influence than they actually do. The problem is that people who need attention the most tend to be the least deserving of it. Just like the acting that Nietzsche blamed for unweaving the social fabric of ancient Greece, those endless theatrics are a significant part of the problem feedback loop that's ripping the nation apart from the inside out. And the only antidote is to study history and human nature, but I will try to pick out the highlights in coming videos.